Amateur Radio News and Notes for Friday, February 20th, 2026. I'm Ed Kavik, November 2, Echo Charlie. In the log this week, we're going to do a contest spotlight of the ARRL International DX Contest this weekend. Also, we'll talk about ARRL Delta Division Assistant Director Frank Howell, K4 FMH, resigning. We'll also talk about Bouvet Island's 3Y0K DXpedition, get a little bit of an update on that. We'll also talk about FCC updates to rules that require FRN updates within 10 days of changes. We'll also recap the MVARC George Washington's Birthday Special Event Station, talk about some MVARC Nets on the air, see what's happening with DX, get a solar activity update, talk about some upcoming contests, and talk about interesting online radio content. As always, links to all reference content can be found in the show notes or at our Substack at mvarc.substack.com. This weekend brings one of the biggest DX contests on the air, the ARRL International DX Contest on CW. Single sideband is in the first week of March. There's so much DX that it may be possible to get a DXCC that's 100 countries in a weekend. If you're a CW op, this is the time to get on the air. The contest starts at 0 UTC on Saturday, that's 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday night, and continues through 23:59 UTC on Sunday, that's 6:59 p.m. on Sunday night. To participate, the DX stations can only work U.S. and Canadian stations. This means this is a contest where the DX is chasing you. The exchange for the contest on the U.S.-Canada side of things is to send a signal report and state or province, and the DX stations send a signal report and power as the number or abbreviation. So, for me in Virginia, my exchange should be 599VA. Bands are 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters, and the power classifications are QRP for 5 watts and below, low power for 5 watts to 100 watts, and high power for up to 1,500 watts. You can work stations once per band, and each QSO is worth 3 points. For the U.S. and Canada, multipliers are each DXCC entity once per band, and for DX, it is each state or province, including DC, once per band. The total score is the number of QSO points times the multipliers. Logs need to be submitted within 7 days of the end of the contest. Full rules and details can be found at arrl.org/ARRL-DX. Good luck. Frank Howell, K4 FMH, who served as the Assistant Director of the Delta Division for the ARRL for 12 years, resigned on February 13th, 2026. In his letter to Delta Division Director David Norris, K5UZ, he cited the recent changes in the ARRL bylaws, specifically Bylaw 46, as a reason for his resignation. The bylaw requires directors to annually recertify that they have read, understand, and agree to comply with the ARRL board member statement or be made ineligible to serve on the board. The statement requires a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience of particular concern to those who have not signed the document or resigned due to its enforcement is the clause concerning the duty of loyalty, which requires directors, quote, maintain confidentiality to ensure candid deliberations and effective strategic and tactical planning. Some have interpreted that clause to be in conflict with the responsibilities of the directors to the membership and potentially in conflict with Connecticut state law. Howell stated that due to Director Norris signing the statement, he, quote, cannot support his actions under the stipulation that he believes that it is not a good outcome for the members of the league. This is a principal issue in his eyes, and therefore he is resigning as an assistant director of the Delta Division. This follows the removal of the Atlantic Division Director Robert Famiglio, K3RF, and the resignation of Eastern Pennsylvania Section Manager Bob Wilson, W3BIG, in the past few weeks. Howell's full letter can be found at a link in the show notes. The highly anticipated 3Y0K DXpedition to Bouvet Island reached a milestone this week. The transport ship Argus arrived in Cape Town, South Africa. The arrival comes after the announcement in January that the team was expecting a delay of about 2 weeks due to vessel maintenance requirements. The location of the Argus can be tracked at a link in the show notes. The 3Y0K DXpedition is one of the most expensive and logistically complicated in history, with a reported budget of around $1.7 million. The They plan to leave from Cape Town, South Africa, and sail to Bouvet for a 3-week DXpedition, but at press time, an exact date of departure has not been announced. The 3Y0K team has mentioned that they have received reports of individuals pirating the call sign on air, and they ask that you not work the pirates, and they do say that there will be official communications from pilots or a team leader when the team is operational. Links to more information can be found at the official site, the ship tracker, and also some DX news coverage at links in the show notes. The Federal Communications Commission amended Section 1.8002b2 of the Commission's rules to require that individuals who register with the FCC for an FCC registration number, more commonly known as an FRN, must update the information in that registration within 10 business days of that change. According to the ARRL, this is a change as there was no specific deadline for those updates previously. All amateurs must have an FRN to file applications. Since that information is separate from the license applications, it needs to be maintained via different updates via CORS and the license manager system. The FCC issued a public notice to clarify this change on February 6th. Last weekend, the Mount Vernon Amateur Radio Club operated as K4US from the grounds of George Washington's Mount Vernon Estate to celebrate his 294th birthday. This event was very successful, with many members of the club and the community joining us on site and on the air. We operated two 100-watt stations on the 20 and 40-meter bands using an ICOM 7100 and a Yaesu FT991A, connected to an N2EC VersaHex antenna in the V-dipole mode and a Chelegans MC750 vertical antenna. All in all, we got over 220 QSOs in the log, working the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, Belgium, and England, as well as 26 states and 3 Canadian provinces. As always, the club is deeply grateful for Mount Vernon hosting us again this year. Thanks for everyone who made this such a fun event. And now let's talk a little bit about some MVARC Nets on the air. We got our 2-meter FM net on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on the repeater. That is immediately followed on the same frequency by the 2-meter digital net on Yaesu System Fusion's C4 FM. On the weekends, we've got the MVARC Slow Speed CW Roundtable on Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 a.m. on 3.565 MHz CW, and that is followed by the MVARC Cherry Tree net on Saturday and Sunday at 8:30 a.m. on 3.920 MHz lower sideband, where there's always a great conversation, and you're always welcome to join us. And now let's talk about what is happening with DX. As you'd expect on a big DX contest weekend, there'll be a lot of DX on the air this week. Stations on the air include the Azores, Bermuda, Martinique, Belize, Barbados, Costa Rica, Bonaire, Aruba, Guyana, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Desecheo Island, Mali, Colombia, and Solomon Islands. A calendar of DXpeditions can be found at dxnews.com/calendar. And now let's take a look at a solar activity update as we go to press. The Solar Flux Index, or SFI, was 119, and the estimated sunspot number was 43, with 3 numbered sunspot regions visible on Earth. Over the last week, the SFI has decreased. Solar activity has been at low levels in the last 24 hours. The geomagnetic field has been at quiet to unsettled levels, and the KP index reached 3 yesterday. The solar wind peaked at 558 kilometers per second. Solar activity is predicted to be at low levels with a slight chance of M-class flares today through Sunday. The geomagnetic field is forecast to be at quiet to unsettled levels today and at quiet levels on Saturday and Sunday. The chance of solar radiation storms at the S1 or greater level is 1% today through Sunday. R1 to R2 radio blackouts are unlikely in the near term, with a predicted probability of 10% today through Sunday. R3 or greater blackouts are unlikely, with a 1% chance predicted today through Sunday. There's a chance of 6-meter propagation, so keep an eye on the band and spotting clusters to be ready for the next time the Magic Band does its thing. It remains a fantastic time for amateurs to get on the air and work the world. Good sources of real-time solar information include spaceweatherlive.com and solarham.com. A good overview of conditions can be found at dx.qsl.net/propagation. To see dealer absorption data and associated radio blackouts, check out NOAA's DRAP page. And to see real-time maximum usable frequency, or MUF, and critical frequency, or FOF2 information from Radio Sun data, visit prop.kc2g.com. This weekend brings the ARRL International DX Contest on CW we mentioned earlier, as well as the RF Contest on SSB, the Russian PSK WW Contest, the Feldhell Sprint, the Worldwide Argentina DX Contest, the High Speed CW Contest, and the Classic Exchange on phone. As always, the K1 USN SSTs, MSTs, and CWTs will also be on the air. The full contest calendar with events and exchanges can be found at contestcalendar.com. And now let's wrap things up with some interesting online radio content. As always, the links to everything we're about to discuss are in the show notes and at our Substack at mvarc.substack.com. Matt M0DQW looks at the new FT2 mode for digital communication. Michael KB9VBR builds an inexpensive Yaesu headset adapter. Mike K8MRD puts up an antenna with his dad. Kevin W1DED gives a POTA update for February 2026. Matt M0DQW looks at the All-Star Radialus Node Z2. Bob WV7W talks about antenna efficiency. Josh KI6NAZ looks at the new Buddy Pole Buddy Hex Mini. Stuart Victor Echo 9 Charlie Foxtrot talks about his favorite DX cluster. Craig KM6LYW talks about the differences between various digital modes. Lewis M3HHY uses a spectrum analyzer and a directional antenna to hunt for signals. Matt M0DQW looks at an automatic antenna switch. Kevin KB9RLW shows how to integrate the DX cluster into QLog. Andy DL6FA has a CW QSO with Redo 5Z4GO in Kenya. Manuel WP4TZ works the massive pileups as KP5/NP3VI remote to Disacheo. Ed W4EMB and Chris N8PM talk about Delta Loop antennas on the CW Corner podcast. Steve KM9G looks at the Ratty RF919 shortwave receiver, and George VK2AOE shows us part 2 of his 40-meter QRP transceiver build. Well, that is it for this week. I've been Ed, November 2 Echo Charlie. Thanks, as always, for joining us. I hope you have a great week ahead. Best 73, and we look forward to seeing you next week.